Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to start. I call to order the informal meeting of the plenary to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. This meeting is convened to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, allowing the membership to reflect on the enduring significance and relevance of the Charter, which seeks to inspire continued cooperation in the pursuit of a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world. The commemoration will comprise an opening segment, a musical performance, and a plenary segment. I now invite delegations to view a video of this occasion, a video for this occasion.
In 1945, when the UN was created, humanity had gone through two catastrophic wars. The First World War, in which 30 million people or so had died, and a Second World War, in which another 60 million people had perished. So the demand by the states to have some sort of security in the future to prevent the outbreak of a Third World War was so insistent that when President Roosevelt of the United States proposed creating this body called the UN, there was an immense attention given to the idea and great enthusiasm among the states that had won the Second World War to come together and actually put together this unusual organization that would stamp out the possibility of conflicts in the future. And that's what brought them together in San Francisco in 1945, and they drafted the UN Charter.
And it is now my duty, my honor and my privilege in the chair to call for a vote on the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
The UN Charter was the sum and substance of humanity crying out for some sort of world order. They created a charter which reflected the aspirations of humanity for peace, for negotiating settlements, for handling food shortages and dealing with health issues and transportation and all the features that go into living a life on the planet. And that was the notion behind the UN. And frankly, the spirit was very enthusiastic at that time. Of course, we now know today that the UN has survived for 80 years through many different crises, and ones that sometimes it helped settle and sometimes was not able to help settle. Nonetheless, the aspiration to have this organization around is so deep in the human spirit that I just think that had the UN dissolved yesterday, it would be reinvented today. It's just so necessary, and we still look up to it as the place to get peace in this world. The world of today is better off, frankly, than it was in 1945. I think it's so important to remember what the UN is all about, why the UN Charter, which was established 80 years ago, is so significant for our lives. It has helped give the ground rules about how people should live their lives, how states should work with each other, how disputes can be settled. So it's almost a kind of guideline for how lives should be lived and how the earth should be governed. The UN represents symbolically the idea of collective security, the idea that we are all together in the plight of humankind, and that we cannot act separately. We have to be unified. Remember, the Charter, the UN Charter, is something we should all treasure for future generations.
Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President of the International Court of Justice, Madam President of the Security Council, Mr. President of the Economic and Social Council, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to welcome you to this meeting of the General Assembly. Today we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. It is a momentous occasion indeed. We are commemorating at a very painful juncture in the life of this organization. Conflicts rage and tensions simmer in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan. Multilateralism, which promotes international cooperation within the United Nations, is under serious attack. Wars and violent confrontations seem more common than dialogue and diplomacy for peace. Unhealed historical wounds are reappearing, and ultra-nationalism is back with a vengeance. Inequality is on the rise, and many international normative practices are regressing. Some important nations have chosen force instead of adherence to international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. That is an extremely dangerous situation. We must seize the moment and choose dialogue and diplomacy instead of destructive wars. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we must not forget that the adoption and the signing of the Charter on 26 June 1945 marked a turning point in modern history. For delegations gathered in San Francisco, it reflected a shared commitment to a better world following the devastation of 2 world wars. Together, they vowed never again to allow such terrible suffering and catastrophic wars. Together, they laid the foundation for a new multilateral order, one that should be anchored in dialogue and cooperation. Together, they shared a bold vision to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, and to promote better standards of life in larger freedom for all. As Abraham Feller, the United Nations' first legal counsel, powerfully declared, and I quote, "The Charter bears the seeds of a great growth, which, if nourished by governments and peoples, can be made to give forth the fruit of deliverance from our age-long perils." End of quote. 80 years on, we bear witness to how that seed has flourished, how it has rooted itself deeply in the soil of multilateralism, and how it has evolved as a living testament to the power of cooperation and shared responsibility to forge peace. We are here today thanks to the commitments made in 1945. The foundation of multilateralism upon which the United Nations sits is increasingly shaken. However, we must not forget the achievements made by our 80-year-old United Nations organization. For 8 decades, the United Nations has stood at the heart of humanity's response to its greatest challenges. From the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the United Nations has established norms. Those norms declare clearly that dignity knows no borders. All human beings have a right to live dignified lives. The United Nations has steered us through decolonization, giving birth to new nations and new hopes. Its peacekeepers have brought calm to conflict, serving with valor and sacrifice. It has championed the cause of human rights, rallied us to protect our planet, and it has shaped a global agenda that envisions peace, development, and dignity, not as dreams for some, but as promises for all. Excellences, Mesdames.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The United Nations is not exempt from reproach. The UN is at an important moment in its history, where it has to undertake reforms to become more effective. The credibility of the UN and of the multilateral system that it embodies depends on its ability to adapt to the realities of our age. The Pact for the Future and its two annexes, namely the Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations, are compasses in this regard. They provide the necessary framework to build a United Nations that is adapted to its mission and oriented towards the future. In the same regard, the reforms launched through the UN80 initiative by the United Nations Secretary-General will make our organization a driver of sustainable international cooperation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Charter that is currently in force was drafted following one of the most lethal conflicts in the history of humanity. The San Francisco Conference, from which this charter resulted, was a moment of celebration of international solidarity. A call for humanity to walk the path of peace, dignity, and shared prosperity. I invite you to honor that legacy. Today, let us revive the spirit of San Francisco. Let us choose dialogue over division, cooperation over conflict, and let us move forward together, thinking of this appeal from our Charter, and I quote, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war." Thank you.
I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 80 years ago, from the ashes of war, the world planted a seed of hope. One charter, one vision, one promise, that peace is possible when humanity stands together. The UN Charter is a declaration of hope and the foundation of international cooperation for a better world. And from day one, the United Nations has been a force of construction in a world often marked by destruction. A meeting ground where the fiercest rivals can come together to solve global problems. An institution where the smallest are represented alongside the most powerful. A platform where voices of people everywhere can be heard. A place grounded in the principles and letter of the Charter and other rules of international law. And an engine of progress for human rights, sustainable development, and humanitarian action. The Charter has given us the tools to change destinies, save lives, and deliver hope to the most desperate corners of the world. And we can draw a direct line from the creation of the United Nations and the prevention of a third world war. Excellencies, upholding the purposes and the principles of the Charter is a never-ending mission. Over the decades, we have celebrated the end of wars while witnessing the start of others. We have delivered life-saving aid to people in desperate need while watching more humanitarian disasters unfold. We have seen progress towards denuclearization and simultaneously renewed steps to rearmament. We had seen the progression of democracy, human rights, and adherence to international law, while unfortunately now seeing a troubling trend in the opposite direction. We have rallied behind the Sustainable Development Goals and also seen growing gaps in inequalities. We have mobilized for climate action and also are enduring record heat and climate chaos. We have witnessed the breathtaking rise of digital technology and artificial intelligence, which holds so much potential for humanity, while we still work to ensure this technology is managed responsibly and safely. Excellencies, we must continue to advance our work across all these fronts. But let's be clear. Today we see assaults on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter like never before. The threat and use of force against sovereign nations. The violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure. The weaponization of food and water. The erosion of human rights. On and on we see an all too familiar pattern. Follow when the Charter suits, ignore when it does not. The Charter of the United Nations is not optional. It is not an à la carte menu. It is the bedrock of international relations. We cannot and must not normalize violations of its most basic principles.
Excellencies, today more than ever, we must respect and renew our commitment to international law, in word as in deed, to adapt to an increasingly multipolar and digital world, to address global shocks with unity and determination, to open our doors wide to civil society, youth and the private sector, and to rethink the way we act by building stronger, renewed, inclusive, networked multilateralism, in sum, a multilateralism that is adapted to the 21st century. In September, Member States adopted the Pact for the Future, reaffirming the world's commitment to international law and the United Nations Charter. On this anniversary, I invite all Member States to live up to the spirit and the letter of the Charter, to the responsibilities that it confers upon us, and the future that it calls upon us to build, for peace, for justice, for progress, for we the peoples. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Caroline Rodrigue Burkett, President of the Security Council. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies all. 80 years ago, in the aftermath of two devastating global wars, visionary leaders gathered in San Francisco with a profound understanding of the urgent need for a new world, one built on the principles of peace, security, and international cooperation. The charter they forged was not a mere document. It was a testament to the resilience of humanity, an unwavering hope for a better future, and a commitment to actively build that future. In the 8 decades that followed, the United Nations has served as the multilateral forum where nations, large and small, come together to address the complex challenges facing our world, from maintaining international peace and security to fostering development in its 3 dimensions: economic, environmental, and social, promoting human rights, and coordinating humanitarian assistance. The positive impact of the UN has been undeniable, and the nations of the world continue to work through the organization to address the world's crises. We continue to attach great value to the principles enshrined in the Charter and are committed to carrying out the purposes of the organization. We believe in the sovereign equality of all states, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and the importance of collective action in addressing global issues. The principles enshrined in the Charter should serve as a guide and a reminder to us that the never-ending human pursuit for peace and the advancement of our condition are causes that we all share. Mr. President, Excellencies, on this anniversary, as we reflect on the achievements of the past 8 decades, we must also acknowledge the challenges that persist and the new threats that have emerged. These challenges and threats demand renewed commitment and innovative approaches to develop effective responses. Further, we must continue to work together to ensure full compliance with the Charter and international law as a means of preserving the international order that we have worked so hard to build on a foundation of peace, as well as the 3 pillars of the United Nations. The Charter gives us a solid foundation to keep advancing a peaceful world. It is our collective responsibility to ensure its continued relevance and effectiveness. As we look to the future, let us refocus our attention on strengthening the ability of the multilateral system to maintain international peace and security and recommit to the international cause of peace. We must work together to enhance the UN's capacity to respond effectively to global crises, to promote development for all, and to ensure that the voices of all nations are heard and respected. Let this 80th anniversary of the Charter be not just an occasion for reflection, but also a call to action. Let us recommit ourselves to the principles and purposes of the Charter, and let us work collaboratively to build a more peaceful and prosperous world for generations to come. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency Bob Ray, President of the Economic and Social Council.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général,
Mr. Secretary General,
President of the General Assembly, President of the Security Council, President of the International Court of Justice, Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues. In recognizing this historic anniversary, it's important to understand the significant meaning of the achievements of 1945, while also taking a time to seriously reflect on our current trajectory. When we take into account that experts are now looking back at our history as a species, looking back 3,000 years, and the Neolithic Revolution in 12,000 years ago, it's worth remembering, as I often say to my grandchildren, that 80 years is not old. We're a young organization in terms of the sense of history. It's in our living memory that this organization, just like our lives, has been marked by successes and failures, periods of true progress and also difficult setbacks. We currently have the advantage of being able to lucidly look at what we have accomplished while also at the same time recognizing our successes and failures without plunging into sterile self-criticism or banalities. The United Nations is not a government, an international government, and the charter that we are commemorating today bears a signature of several nations, is not perfect, we should say that. It was founded with great aspirations, with the hope that was already mentioned by the Secretary General, but also marked by the geopolitics of the time. That's inevitable. It's a consequence of the compromises that had to be made to set up an organization that remains today the only multilateral organization which is universal. We continue to live with the imagination of our predecessors and also the limitations within which we have to work. That's how life is, that's how politics is, and that's how we have to work. But we also have to continue. We mustn't cede to pessimism or allow ourselves to be carried away by rhetoric. When Benjamin Franklin was asked what form of government was created by the American Revolution, he answered wisely. He said, "A republic, if we are able to conserve it." We could say the very same of the Charter. With the establishment of the General Assembly, the Security Council Secretariat, the Economic and Social Council, and the International Court of Justice, and all of the institutions and treaties that have been established since then, by using these tools to build a better world, if we are able to do so, if we are able to use them. It was the great philosopher Blaise Pascal who described the dilemma that we face. Justice without power is powerless. Power without justice is tyrannical.
That without enforcement, justice is impotent, but that power without justice is tyranny is still the central dilemma that surrounds us in all the work that we do. Tyranny and injustice enfold and threaten us today just as surely as they did in 1945. But like the great generation that struggled with the Depression, the rise of fascist and communist dictatorships, and then fought a bitter and devastating war, our own times require our commitment to values and principles in a spirit of achieving the possible, but never ceasing to seek the better. I would remind us all that human rights and economic justice, and here I speak as President of the Economic and Social Council, are as much a part of the Charter as peace and security. The Charter, yes, it insisted on the equality of nation states and it pointed throughout to the dangers of aggression. But it also created an economic and social council whose focus is nothing less than the human condition itself, the dignity and equality of all people, the deeper and widening prosperity that are so important for our well-being. Mr. President, I have in my hand a copy of the charter that my father used to use, and I have from time to time referred to it, and I will only refer briefly to two pages. In the first article, when it states the purposes of the UN, it states very clearly that its objective is, yes, peace and security, yes, improving relations between countries, but also to promote and encourage respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms, for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. So those who say they are friends of the Charter, this is what you have to be friends of. Not just pick and choose, not just the a la carte menu that the Secretary General referred to. And all of chapters 9 and 10 are about the social and economic rights of all the people. It's all about how can we use the experiences that took us through not just the war, but the dark valley of poverty and of depression and of excessive nationalism that marked the years leading up to that war. And that's what led to the creation of the Economic and Social Council. That is what has led to the creation of all the agencies that are as much a part of the purpose of the United Nations as the Security Council or of the Presidency or even of the Secretariat. And it's important for us to remember that. Over the last 80 years, we've seen billions lifted out of poverty and over 140 countries achieving political independence. We have learned that the pursuit of peace and security, the linking of development and sustainability, and the expansion of human rights and freedoms under the rule of law are not only compatible or nice to have, they are essential pillars of this organization in everything to do. The network that we have built, which we are now seeking to reform under the program of UN 80, the network we've created is there for a reason. It's not to subsume nation states. It's to strengthen nation states. It's to allow and permit and provide the resources that allow nation states to do what they want to do. Global and even planetary problems and challenges cannot be solved by national and local governments alone, but neither can they be addressed effectively without civil society, without nation states, without local and regional governments, and an active citizenry all around the world, all engaging in transforming laws, treaties, and even resolutions into realities. It was the great Jawaharlal Nehru who once said that he regarded the Commonwealth, which India joined upon independence, as independence plus. We should see the UN in the same spirit, not as the enemy of sovereignty, but rather as its enabler. As we renew our vows, as it were, today, the vows that some of us made in 1945 and all of us made at some point since that time, accepting the Charter in all of its strengths and all of its weaknesses, but accepting the principles that are there. Let us continue to fight hate, tyranny, and the poverty that still afflicts too many people, and to renew our commitment to freedom, sovereignty, and equality under law. There are, after all, forces in the world now, as there were in 1945, that spread messages of despair, that tell us how bad we're doing, that say how awful everything is, including everything about the United Nations. Well, if I may borrow a phrase from a famous former American ambassador to the United Nations, don't blame Madison Square Gardens every time the Knicks lose a basketball game. Responsibility lies in us. It lies in nation states. And so we have to continue to fight against misinformation and lies and to take back the dark night that denies the light of truth, rationality, science, and the rule of law. We didn't find perfection in 1945, and we do not have it today. But no matter what the song says, we did not lose our hearts in San Francisco. Rather, it would be more correct to say we found them. We found our hearts as well as our minds, as well as our collective will. And that's what we must never lose. And let us also remember that it's not just politicians and diplomats who represent what the United Nations is. Let us reflect on the dedication of the doctors and nurses who are caring, as we speak, for the sick and the wounded. Let us reflect on the refugees who are struggling to find the pathways to education and work and who never, ever give up. Let us reflect on the women refusing to accept the autocracy of gender apartheid. Let us celebrate the innovators and entrepreneurs excited by the potential of new technologies and new discoveries. We must continue to have, as they have, the courage and heart of good people. We have the skills of people who know how to build things, who know how to make things, who know how to improve things. And we have the persistence of all those who have taught us never, ever to relent in the face of cruelty, neglect, complacency, and cynicism. Let us, instead of seeking perfection, which we will never find, let us rather embrace the beauty of the broken, to see that failure is the essential step in learning how to pick ourselves up and succeed. The poet and singer Leonard Cohen told us, and I've used these words before from this podium, but it won't be the last time you will hear me say this. Let us remember to ring the bells that still can ring, and remember to forget your perfect offerings. There is a crack in everything, which is where the light gets in. Let us continue to learn, to repair, to heal, to forgive, and yes, to love and treat each other and the world we are in with dignity and respect, which are the foundational values that we find in the charter we are commemorating today. Let us reform and have the courage to reform in order to preserve and in order to improve. And let us, above all, continue to find the places, wherever we can find them, where the light gets in. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the Economic and Social Council. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Yuji Iwasawa, President of the International Court of Justice.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to represent the International Court of Justice in commemorating the 80th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter. At the end of an era marked by the scourge of war, the delegates in San Francisco were determined to advance justice and respect for international law. Today, despite challenges, the Charter remains the cornerstone of the international legal order. The Charter is the foundational instrument of the international community. It is a treaty, but certainly not an ordinary one. It prevails over all other international agreements pursuant to its Article 103. It establishes an organ that may take decisions concerning international peace and security that are binding upon all members. Further, it does not contain any provisions governing withdrawal, reflecting the drafter's ambition of perpetual membership. The members of the United Nations are not merely parties to a treaty. They are members of a community. The Charter is not merely an agreement, it is the constitution of this community. While the parties to the Charter are states, it is people who are at its center. In 1950, Herschel Lauterpacht, who would later become a renowned judge of the court, observed that certain provisions of the Charter amounted to recognition of individuals as subject of international law. Key to his conclusion was the Charter's incorporation of obligations to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. Before the adoption of the Charter, international law contained few rules governing states' treatment of their own nationals, which was often considered part of the internal affairs of states. While some efforts were made during the interwar period to protect human rights at the international level, this protection only extended to certain rights or only covered a limited number of states. The Charter was truly groundbreaking, rendering the protection of human rights of all individuals by all states a matter of international concern. This is demonstrated by Article 1, Paragraph 3 of the Charter, which lists respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms as one of the purposes of the United Nations. At the same time, Paragraph 1 of the same article identifies the maintenance of international peace and security as another purpose of the organization. It is of great significance that the Charter recognizes that the protection of human rights is a precondition for the maintenance of international peace and security. The Charter did not itself define human rights. This task was assumed by the Commission on Human Rights, whose work led to the adoption by the General Assembly of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 and of the Twin Covenants in 1966. In addition, the General Assembly has adopted a number of specific conventions on human rights. As a result, elaborate mechanisms for the protection of human rights have been developed within the United Nations, namely the Charter-based mechanisms and the treaty-based mechanisms, which are complemented by regional mechanisms. The adoption of the Charter thus marked the beginning of a process of continual expansion of international human rights law. The Charter has also proved essential in establishing the self-determination of peoples as a right under international law. In Article 1, Paragraph 2, the Charter recognizes the principle of self-determination as one of the purposes of the United Nations. The subsequent adoption by the General Assembly of the Declaration on the Granting of Independence in 1960 was a defining moment for the consolidation of the right to self-determination as a customary norm. Thus, the Charter provided the foundation for the process of decolonization, which has transformed the international community. Another distinctive feature of the Charter is a prohibition of the use of force, set out in Article 2, Paragraph 4. While the 1928 Kellogg-Briand Pact had renounced war, the Charter marked a momentous advancement when it prohibited the threat or use of force. The Charter is also of crucial importance because it established the International Court of Justice as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. The court will celebrate the 80th anniversary of its inaugural sitting next year. The Charter empowers the court to settle disputes between states and to give advisory opinions. 74 states have accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, and more than 300 treaties give the court jurisdiction to settle disputes relating to their interpretation. Since 1945, in total, 169 contentious cases and 31 advisory proceedings have been filed. There are currently 26 cases pending before the court, involving states from all 5 regional groups of the United Nations. The court faces an extraordinarily high workload, a sign of the continuing trust that states place in it. The Court has had occasion to interpret the provision of the Charter, providing authoritative guidance for states and assisting organs of the United Nations. In clarifying the meaning of the provision of the Charter, the Court helps strengthen the rule of law and the international legal order. One of the most important principles of the Charter is the principle of sovereign equality of states. In the Great Hall of Justice, this principle is put in practice in the most tangible way, as all parties appearing before the court are equal and disputes are resolved on the basis of international law. In the 80 years since the drafters of the Charter set down their pens, the international community has achieved remarkable progress. However, it also faces many challenges. The vision of the Charter's drafters to uphold the rule of law for the maintenance of international peace and security remains not only relevant, but indispensable today. I am confident that the members and the organs of the United Nations will continue to address new challenges as they emerge in accordance with the principles enshrined in the Charter. As we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Charter, we are reminded that the rule of law is not a static achievement, but a continuous and collective endeavor. The Charter provides the framework for this pursuit, and the Court is instrumental to it. In this process, we must not forget that the Charter was adopted to serve the peoples of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
I thank the President of the International Court of Justice. I now give the floor to Jordan Sanchez, Youth Representative.
Let the light fall. Fall on fallen faces hidden in the shadow of scorn and scars. Picked and prodded, scorched and singed, what is the world I have woken up in? Where is Eden on this side of heaven? Where the clouds of fluff hold rain and respite, not smoke and dust. Where they float away with time, not frozen in a place of perpetual tastes of gray. Where may the children run towards the light of your face, towards the warmth of your presence, the stillness of your peace? It's everlasting, how a sunrise should be and always feels, embedded in place forever. So let the light fall on our open hands, sun spilling from bent knuckles like grains of sand. I can't contain it, but there is no fear, only abundance of safety, of security, of knowing there will always be enough light for me. So let the light fall from open mouths, kept promises from wisdom and love stream like a river of living water. Wells never run dry in Eden, so they shouldn't run dry here, only east of it. So let the light fall. Let it flow and follow the trails of commissioned feet and fossilized footprints in the pillows of soil and sand, the dust I was made from, billowing in clouds, glowing with fullness and light and love and hope. Let the light fall. Let it pour from eyes the color of the earth, nourishment found in the faces all around me, because all I want to see, all I've ever wanted to see, all I was created to see is light. So let it fall. Let it pour like rain, immediate and direct, with an announcement of thunder and horns, or no warning, like a summer shower's immediacy, leaving drops on the window, saturating all in its path, lingering on the street and workplace and playground when it stops. A promise of return, and return it will. It must. We are to be a place, a people of peace. The roads are paved with it. No shadows because the sun shines deep and hot. illuminating every cold crack and crevice, and every scene is not a source, but a reflection. The light will fall, and when it does, when it finally does, open my eyes. Let me truly see Eden right in front of me. Let me cling to goodness, knuckles white because we've lived far from it before. Lost and weary, please do not take me back. Do not let us take ourselves back to a time where Eden was only a wish, a dream, not a reality I've truly seen, in glimpses and gaps, not in moments of ease, but those of a permeating sense of peace, of safety, of security, of fairness, of righteousness, of justice, of wholeness, of goodness. So let the light fall and let it pour at our feet. Let us be bold enough to look down and take it, humble enough to kneel down and bathe in it, loving enough to collect and share it, and childish enough to truly, truly believe in it.
I thank Ms. Sanchez. We heard the last speaker in this opening segment. As indicated in the program, a plenary segment will begin immediately following a special musical performance. The opening segment is now concluded. I request all delegations to remain in their seats while the orchestra comes to the stage. I would like to welcome this morning the International Academy for Arts and Cultural Studies Orchestra for Hope that will perform two pieces to honor this important anniversary. The first piece is titled Fanfare for the General Assembly, commissioned especially for this occasion. It pays tribute to the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, echoing the tradition of ceremonial works by composers such as Aaron Copland's Fanfare for the Common Man and Dmitry Shostakovich, United Nations March. The second is Ode to Joy, from Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, which has long served as a global symbol of unity and human fraternity. For this celebration, it has been newly arranged to reflect the enduring principles of the United Nations Charter: unity in diversity, dignity, and shared purpose. This special arrangement honors the international community's ongoing commitment to peace, cooperation, and the ideas first proclaimed in San Francisco in 1945. The orchestra is conducted by Jorge Soto. I now invite delegations to listen to the musical performance by the International Academy for Arts and Cultural Studies Orchestra for Hope. I thank the International Academy for Arts and Cultural Studies Orchestra for Hope. The Assembly will now begin the plenary segment. Before giving the floor to the first speaker on the list of speakers, delegations are reminded that statements are limited to 3 minutes for groups of states and 2 minutes for individual states and observers. As announced in my letter dated 14th May, these time limits will be strictly enforced by means of automatic microphone cutoff. In accordance with Resolution 72/313, the all protocol observed principle is recommended, whereby participants are encouraged to refrain from listing standard protocol expressions during their statements. As delegations are aware, there is a long list of speakers. Should we not have enough time to hear all statements, written statements may be submitted to e-statements@un.org and will be posted in the United Nations Journal. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda, who will speak on behalf of the non-aligned movement.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement underscores the importance of the United Nations as a major multilateral organization, recognized for its influential role in international peace, security, development, and shaping international law. As we mark the 80th anniversary of the UN, we must reflect on the virtues of the Charter of the United Nations, with a preamble epitomizing the UN as we, the people, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, reaffirming our faith in the fundamental human rights, in dignity and worth of the human person, in equal rights of men and women and of nations, large and small, and to establish conditions for justice and respect for international land treaties and promote social progress and better standards of living. NAM fully reaffirms these values enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Now member states are committed to supporting and strengthening the values of the Charter of the United Nations as the cornerstone of multilateralism, international diplomacy, and international cooperation. We reaffirm our commitment to the United Nations as the primary multilateral institution with a global mechanism to promote and support the intertwined values of humanity, namely peace, security, development, and inalienable human rights, the mechanism for the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and the implementation of the Pact for the Future. The non-aligned movement reaffirms and underscores the validity and relevance of the UN, which must endeavor to live to its relevance and employing all its global diplomatic reach, especially the current juncture when multilateralism is under serious threat and rise in uncertainty. At the 19th NAM Summit held in Kampala, Uganda in January 2024, the heads of state and government of the non-aligned movement reaffirmed the validity of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles and norms of international law as indispensable in preserving and promoting peace and security, the rule of law, economic development, and social progress, and all human rights for all. The United Nations can adapt to the evolving global challenges just as its charter and international law remain indispensable tools in promoting and maintenance of international peace and security and strengthening of international cooperation. The expansion of the UN membership from the original 51 member states in 1945 to the current 193 member states is clear testimony of the undiminished role of collective responsibility in addressing global challenges that transcend national boundaries beyond any one country acting alone. Therefore, NAM rejects all forms of unilateralism and fully embraces the original ideals of we the peoples enunciated in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations. NAM reiterates the need to strengthen the United Nations as the primary multilateral organization, providing it with substantive capacity to fully and effectively meet the purposes and principles enshrined in its charter. We call on the consolidation of the democratic and intergovernmental character of the
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union, who will speak on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries Turkey, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Georgia, as well as Andorra and San Marino align themselves with this statement. Dear colleagues, 80 years ago, from the ashes of global war, the world rose together. We did so fueled by a vision of hope for all humanity, but also by a hardened conviction. The Charter of the United Nations was born from the determination to replace chaos with cooperation, power with principle, and war with peace. It was the world's attempt to answer one core existential question: how do we make peace last? 5 years later, That same conviction gave birth to what is today the European Union, after centuries of war, conflict, division, and human devastation. We also had to ask ourselves the same existential question: how do we make peace last? Our answer: through reconciliation, the rule of law over the rule of the mighty, solidarity, economic cooperation, and human rights, not through force, but through trust and empathy, not through domination, but through partnership. We forged and are still forging a common identity based not on uniformity, but on unity in diversity. That is why, for the European Union, the United Nations Charter is not just a document. It is a living legal and political compass for global peaceful coexistence. It is a mirror of our principles and values, which we uphold, and our history, which we remember, and are committed never to repeat. And that is why, when we see the Charter and international law being violated on a global scale, from Ukraine to the Middle East, and from Myanmar to Haiti, to give just a few examples, we do not stand neutral. We stand firm, because we know what is at stake. For this reason, we also fully support the role of the International Court of Justice, upholding international law and reinforcing the rules-based order. Multilateralism, dear colleagues, is strength, not weakness. It is the courage to put collective good above short-term personal interests. And it is the belief that unity in diversity is not just possible, it is powerful. We all know the UN is not perfect. No one is. But there is no alternative to the UN. Together, over decades, it has lifted millions from poverty, defended human rights and dignity, especially for the most vulnerable, empowered women and girls, brought health and education to children and adults in all corners of the world, fostered peace and sustainable development, protected our environment, and promoted the respect for international law in all aspects of our global commons, step by determined step. So let us mark this 80th anniversary with resolve to make the United Nations more inclusive, more effective and efficient, leaving no one behind, to uphold international law and the UN Charter, especially when they are tested. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I pledge to you, both with humility and with conviction, that the
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iraq, who will speak on behalf of the group of 77 and China.
President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the group of 77 and China. On this auspicious occasion, as we commemorate the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, some 8 decades in, we find ourselves at the grasp of multiple crises, including a serious threat of war, which goes contrary to fundamental principles and objectives of the Charter. We must reflect on and fully respect these principles and objectives, particularly to their related equality among states, respect for the independence of states, national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in internal affairs of states, and stress that those principles and objectives inspire our full commitments to multilateralism and the search for more justice and equitable international economic system that offers opportunities to eradicate poverty, raise the standard of living of our people. The group commits to partnership to fulfill obligations to foster peace while ensuring prosperity for people and the planet through the proper execution of 3 pillars of the United Nations in a balanced and equitable manner, calls on all UN member states to do the same. The group calls on all nations to seize this opportunity to renew the multilateral spirit of this august organization and its charter. We all join to the UN with the hope working together to create a better tomorrow for our current and the future generations, with the hope also to support each other to tackle present, future problems and challenges facing humankind, and arriving at a solution within overarching framework agreed to multilaterally in democratic and equitable way inspired by common interests and aspiration of we, the people of the United Nations. Mr. President, please allow me to deliver a statement as national capacity.
Iraq was one of the very first countries to sign the Charter and one of the 50 first founding members. We are proud of our heritage in support of the existing international order based on international law and principles of cooperation. Today, we reiterate our full commitment to these principles, which are the foundation of the system of the United Nations. The world, since the establishment of the United Nations, witnessed great changes, and the organization faced unprecedented challenges, yet it remained the most comprehensive and important framework uniting the states and countries of the world under an umbrella of common objectives. The current challenges require a holistic reform of the United Nations, on top of which the Security Council, in order to guarantee a just and equitable representation reflecting the current geopolitical situation and to improve and reinforce the Security Council. The reform of the international order should be done through a comprehensive dialogue between all members and to preserve the spirit of the Charter, which remains our reference. This commemoration is not only to celebrate, it represents also a moment to review and evaluate and a chance to promote the United Nations, making it more just and more effective and capable to respond to the aspirations of people. And the microphone has been cut off.
I thank the distinguished representative of Iraq. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, who will speak on behalf of the group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations.
Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, it is my honor to take the floor on behalf of the group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, born from the ashes of war, the Charter of the United Nations continues to guide us in our collective pursuit of peace, sustainable development, and human rights. The principles contained in it, such as respect for the sovereign equality of states, self-determination, and non-intervention in internal affairs, the peaceful resolution of disputes, and the prohibition of the threat or use of force remain as important today as they were in 1945. Today, we must stress the Palestinian question, which is an example of injustice, a stain on the conscience of our international community. The inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination, return, and the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital and within the pre-1967 borders, must be fully realized in accordance with international law and relevant United Nations resolutions, and that on the basis of the two-state solution. The State of Palestine must also be admitted as a full member of the United Nations. Similarly, the application of unilateral coercive measures is incompatible with the UN Charter. These measures undermine state sovereignty, hinder development, and violate the human rights of more than one-third of humanity, especially in the global south. They represent, along with the question of Palestine, an example of double standards in the observance of international law, as well as an indication of the erosion of the system of international relations as a whole. We demand their total, immediate, and unconditional lifting. Today, colonialism has new practices, including economic exploitation, the artificial restriction of development opportunities, the limitations to access to new technologies, and interference in the internal affairs of states. Therefore, we condemn colonialism, which runs counter to the ideals of universal peace and coexistence envisioned in the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, defending the United Nations is defending peace, justice, and the sovereign dignity of each member of this organization. Let us seize this moment to revive the spirit of unity that prevailed in San Francisco in 1945 and to renew our commitment to the vision enshrined in the Charter. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Venezuela. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore, who will speak on behalf of the Small States Group.
I have the honor to make this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. The list of 56 countries that have aligned with this statement will be circulated in due course. 80 years ago, the world emerged from the devastation of war, and we, the peoples of the United Nations, dared to imagine a better future. That powerful vision culminated in the adoption of the UN Charter, which continues to stand as a symbol of our collective commitment to peace, stability, and prosperity. Today, the world is facing many challenges of war and conflict, a slowdown of sustainable development, and violations of human rights. As small states, we believe that now is the time to double down on multilateralism. Allow me to make 3 points. First, we must continue to speak out and stand up for a multilateral system founded on the Charter and international law. We cannot allow violations of international law to become the new normal, nor can we allow the notion to prevail that might is right. We need to recommit to the principles of the Charter and the rule of law. We need a strong and effective multilateral system based on respect for sovereignty, sovereign equality, and territorial integrity. Second, we must work together to strengthen the capacity of the United Nations to reinforce global solidarity, support sustainable development, and protect human rights. In the words of the Charter, the UN must remain the center for harmonizing the actions of nations. We must invest in the UN as the platform for dialogue and cooperation. We need to build a multilateral system that bridges divisions, restores trust, and uplifts all nations. Thirdly, we must ensure that the UN is future-oriented. This requires all countries to work together to refresh, reform, and reposition the UN so that it can deliver on its mandate in an efficient and agile way. The Pact for the Future provides the roadmap to make the UN fit for purpose and future-ready. Mr. President, after 80 years, the UN remains the only forum where all nations, large and small, can come together to seek solutions to global problems. As we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter today, the members of the Small States Group reaffirm our commitment to the principles and purposes of the Charter. We stand ready to work with all member states to support and strengthen the UN so that it can continue to bring peace and stability for all our peoples and our nations. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy, who will speak on behalf of a group of countries celebrating the 70th anniversary of the admission to the United Nations.
Mr. President, Excellencies, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of Albania, Austria, Bulgaria, Cambodia, Finland, Hungary, Ireland, Jordan, Laos PDR, Libya, Nepal, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Sri Lanka, and my own country, Italy. I'm delivering a shorter version of our statement due to time constraint. The full version has already been sent to e-statements. Today, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the UN Charter, our countries also celebrate another momentous recurrence, the 70th anniversary of our collective membership in the UN. With unique journeys leading to the membership, our collective admission to the United Nations on December 14, 1955, marked a significant moment for our countries. That event also represented a turning point in the history of the United Nations itself, as the organization expanded to include many more nations from different regions, reflecting its universal spirit. That day marked the beginning of a long history of collaboration between our countries and the largest global organization, where each of us has played an active role, engaging from our different positions and experiences with the common aim to collectively address global challenges. The Charter of the United Nations, which followed the San Francisco Conference, established fundamental principles with great foresight. Respect for national sovereignty, the right of self-determination of people, the obligation to resolve international disputes through peaceful means, promoting and respecting human rights and the dignity and fundamental freedom of all individuals, without distinctions of ethnicity, religion, social origins, and other characteristics. The UN Charter remains our collective constitution, and these principles remain valid today, and they should be respected by all. 70 years since joining the organization, we want to reaffirm our collective unwavering commitment to the rules and principles set forth in the Charter. We represent 16 countries from 3 continents and many different regions, 16 countries with a very diverse cultural, historical, and social background. No matter our differences, what unites us all will always be more than what differentiates us, because we all aim at the same goals: sustainable peace and prosperity based on justice, equality, and human rights for all. As we celebrate this milestone, 2025 is unfortunately recording the highest number of conflicts since World War II, with all the dramatic consequences for civilian populations, including innocent women and children. Faced with this reality just as 8 years ago, multilateralism and dialogue are the only possible response to put an end to violence. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the UN belongs to all of us. Together we continue to defend the Charter of the United Nations and its fundamental principles of peace, sovereign, equality, cooperation, and respect between peoples that unite us all. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Yemen on behalf of the Arab Group.
I have the pleasure to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group on the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations. This establishment that has been since day one a rostrum to promote international peace and security, protect human rights, support development, and establish principles of justice and cooperation between the states. The signing of the Charter has been a pivotal moment in our modern history, reflecting the aspirations of humanity to overcome the plague of war and to respect the sovereignty of the states. The Arab states were among the founding states in this international project, and they still believe in the principles and defend them. Under the accelerating challenges of the international order, the Arab Group reiterates its adherence to principles of peaceful settlement. We refuse all kinds of colonization, occupation, and interference in the internal states. We affirm that the occupation of Arab and Palestinian land is a stark violation of the Charter and threatens international and regional stability. We support the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people and the right to self-determination and to establish their independent states within the borders of 67 with Jerusalem East as a capital. We call upon all to implement all mechanisms in order to achieve a just and lasting peace and end the plight of the Palestinian people. We regret immensely that the United Nations, and despite these 8 decades, is still unable to end the longest colonization in our modern history and to achieve justice for the Palestinian people. We are fully committed to implement the Plan 2030, being a holistic roadmap to achieve economic, social, environmental development for all peoples with no exception. We are extremely concerned regarding the increase in financement gap between the North and the South and the multiple crises that affect the developing countries, especially in the Arab region, which faces compounded challenges because of the climate and economy. And in this regard, we welcome the initiative of the Secretary General to reform the international financial order in order to promote values of justice and equity in the financement. We call for concessional financement, transfer of technology, and to deal with the debt in order to enable developing countries to face the current challenges and achieve sustainable development within a framework of common responsibility and partnership. The international challenges, on top of which the climate change and crises of water, energy, etc., impose upon us the promotion of international cooperation and to go beyond the words to acts and to be translated into tangible steps based on equity. We renew our adherence to multilateralism and the pivotal role of the United Nations to deal with the peace, development, and human rights. And we fully support His Excellency, the Secretary General, in his ongoing efforts in order to revive multilateralism and to improve the performance of United Nations on the basis that are more just and to respond to the aspirations of peoples of the world. Thank you, President.
The distinguished representative of Yemen. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation on behalf of the Union State of Russia and Belarus.
Mr. President, I have the honor to make a statement on behalf of the delegations of the Republic of Belarus and the Russian Federation as the member countries of the Union State. The signing on the 25th of June 1945 of the UN Charter laid the foundations of the post-world order, and it remains the cornerstone of international law to this day. Today we are talking about the heritage left to us by the member states of the anti-Hitler coalition, which, following the disaster and destruction caused by the Second World War, found in themselves the strength and political will to set aside ideological differences and to unite for the sake of a common goal, to save succeeding generations from the horrors of further wars. For that possibility, the world paid an enormous price, and the Soviet Union, at the hands of the Nazis, around 27 million people died. The unthinkable suffering of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers was the result of a policy of genocide conducted by the occupiers against the Soviet people. The barbarity carried out by Nazis in our countries will never be forgotten. Russia and Belarus's commitment to preserving historic truth is part of the DNA of our peoples. Aware of the value of the great victory over Nazism, we will not allow any doubt to be shed on its outcomes, reflected in the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter in its totality. At the same time, we can see that in the modern world, there are difficult times going on, and with each year, the purposes and principles of the Charter are being further eroded and being sorely tested. The stance of the West on replacing the UN Charter with a rules-based order is undermining confidence in international institutions as an organ for agreeing interests and in international law as a guarantee of justice and the defense of the weak. We must all speak out against such attempts and unipolar models of global development for the sake of an equal and sustainable world order. This clearly is not liked by those that want to preserve the post-colonial system. A great deal of work is ahead of us, and it will not be easy. The reform processes within the UN need to be carried out under strict control of member states. Ultimately, the UN should once again become a universal platform for honest discussions to find mutually acceptable and respectful solutions. It was with that aim that in 2021 the Group of Friends in Defense of the Charter was created, which Russia and Belarus were among the co-founders of. Mr. President, Russia and Belarus call upon all members of the UN to refrain from phobias, stereotypes, and various geopolitical projects, and to respect one another's interests, to establish constructive, creative work in the name of the future of all of humanity, and to refrain from a logic of a zero-sum game. Only then will we be able to achieve the desired result and preserve the legacy that was left to us by the founding fathers of the UN. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the name of God, the most merciful, the compassionate, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the GCC countries, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Sultanate of Oman, and my own country, the State of Kuwait. On this same day, 80 years ago, the world was standing on the ruins of two destructive wars. It was aspiring to a more just international order and a more stable one. And the Charter of the United Nations was born. It embodied this common aspiration towards the achievement of peace, security, and development. The Charter was the framework to organize relations between the states. It has established principles that still guide us today in our quest towards a more balanced and just future. With the increasing challenges and threats to the international community today, from the increase in armed conflict, the decrease in development, and the increase in challenges for human and environment, and the stillness that accompanies this organization towards these challenges. Our countries reaffirm the principles of the Charter. This is no option. It is an imperative for a world that knows that is governed by stability and the respect for international law. the enshrinement of the values of sovereignty of states, the non-interference in their internal affairs, and respect for their territorial integrity is the cornerstone for any just world order. The accelerating changes witnessed by our world today require the promotion of the role of the United Nations as an overarching umbrella in order to work underneath and coordinate the response. Therefore, our countries believe in the importance of investing in the capacity of this organization and to promote its position as a platform for dialogue and understanding, and to allow this organization to perform its role in safeguarding and maintaining peace and security, support for development, and build bridges of trust between the nations. In this regard, we view the Pact for the Future as a promising step to modernize this organization, rendering it more able to face future challenges and closer to the aspirations of the people. We all have to be in solidarity in order to build this future with a spirit of inclusiveness and modernity. We welcome the UN 80 initiative of the Secretary General in order to reform the United Nations. We affirm that our support for these efforts reflects the commitment of our countries to develop the mechanisms and methods of work of this organization, enabling it to play its vital role as a multilateral organization for this world and in line with the aspirations of our people. This reform should support and promote the three pillars of this organization, which are peace, security, development, and human rights, in order to achieve our common goal in protecting future generations from the plight of war, from the scourge of war. And the microphone has been cut off.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Indonesia, Ireland, Jordan, Lebanon, Mexico, Norway, Portugal, Slovenia, and South Africa.
Yes, delivering this statement on behalf of Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Indonesia, Ireland, Jordan, Lebanon, Mexico, Norway, Portugal, Slovenia, South Africa, and Thailand. Our countries reaffirm our unwavering commitment to multilateralism and the purposes, principles, and values of the UN Charter, and our unshakable belief that respect for international law is indispensable to the pursuit of the Charter purposes. We gather today to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the adoption of the Charter and to renew our resolve to uphold the ideals underlying the Charter and this organization. Founders of the UN were driven by a new vision for the world, one built on solidarity and cooperation, on freedom and dignity, on human rights and self-determination. At the heart of that vision lies the realization that the pursuit of justice and upholding the rule of law are indispensable bedrocks of peace. It is a vision that understands that a world without respect for international law will make everyone less safe, less prosperous, and less free. Yet this vision of a world predicated on justice and the rule of law is far from being realized. Our world faces multiple challenges, including armed conflict, occupation, the climate crisis, inequality, poverty, and emergence of new disruptive technology. And instead of addressing these challenges by recommitting ourselves to the values of the Charter, there is a sense that belief in multilateralism is eroding, the value of international organization is being questioned, and respect for international law is diminishing. We must resist these trends. We must reaffirm our common faith in multilateralism and international law as indispensable to the promotion of the common welfare of humankind. We reiterate that inconsistent application and mischaracterization of cardinal rules of international law, including the prohibition on the use of force and fundamental rules of international humanitarian law, and the failure to comply with decisions of international judicial bodies, undermine the effectiveness of the international legal system. It is imperative that the marking of this anniversary is not merely ceremonial. It should be viewed as an opportunity to assess how the UN can better serve present and future generations and how we, member states, can strengthen its role, including by redoubling our efforts to ensure respect for the Charter and international law more generally. Let us recall that no nation is an island unto itself, and that the challenges facing humanity can only effectively be addressed collaboratively with full respect for relevant rules of international law and progressive development of the law where necessary. Let the 80th session of the GA be a catalyst to dedicate ourselves to the purposes and principles of the Charter, to multilateralism and to the rule of law. Let us renew the promise of the UN so that when the 100th anniversary of the Charter is observed, we will be remembered as a generation that chose to pursue peace and prosperity through the rule of law and the pursuit of justice. Thank you. I did it. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tuvalu on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States Group.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States. 80 years ago, the United Nations Charter laid a foundation for an international system built on peace, sovereign equality, and shared progress. At the time, many of our nations were not yet independent, but the vision it offered of dignity, justice, and cooperation shaped our path to statehood and global engagement. Since then, the Pacific has worked to uphold those ideals. We have contributed to international law, supported peacekeeping, defended ocean governance, and led on climate diplomacy and legal innovation. Our actions reflect the resolve of small states to protect the multilateral system and ensure it works for all. Today, the system is under pressure. Conflict persists, inequality is deepening, and trust is eroding. The principles agreed in San Francisco still matter, but they must be renewed through action. For the Pacific, the climate crisis remains our most urgent priority. Rising seas and salt intrusions are threatening our communities, economies, and in some cases, the future of our homelands. We have taken the climate crisis to the International Court of Justice, advanced marine biodiversity protection, and championed the BBNJ agreement. But the global response must match the scale of the challenge. That means delivering on climate finance, operationalizing the loss and damage fund, and ensuring that the 1.5-degree limit remains the baseline for ambition. We welcome the Secretary General's UN 80 initiative as an opportunity to ensure the system serves those who rely on it most. Reform must enhance participation, support small states, and remove access barriers. That includes a stronger UN presence in seats, improved financing instruments, and more inclusive governance structure from the General Assembly to the Security Council. We also reaffirm the need for greater representation across the UN system, including for persons with disabilities, women and girls, youth, and indigenous communities. Inclusion must be a measure of legitimacy, not a footnote. The Pacific will continue to lead with clarity, purpose, and persistence. Let this milestone be a moment to recommit to a system that delivers, to principles that endure, and to a future that's shaped by will, but not by chance. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tuvalu. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of St. Kitts and Nevis, speaking on behalf of the Caribbean community.
I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. For the peoples of CARICOM, the UN Charter is both a foundational text and a living covenant. we honor the legacy of the signing of the Charter as a choice of unity over division and principle over power. The principle enshrined in Article 2, Paragraph 1 of the Charter, the sovereign equality of nations, has informed the engagement of a community of small states to contribute to norm setting, to advance the issues that matter most to our people, and to help shape our global future. We have embodied the spirit of multilateralism in deliberate peace, championing development, and defending the rule of law. Mr. President, we are in a moment of global governance as a new venture. The United Nations must be inclusive and responsive regarding the current realities and evolve to address future risk. The Pact of the Future and the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS present the opportunity for a renewed social contract. CARICOM nations have drawn strength from our people's ingenuity, and we are deeply reliant on a functional global economy. Yet, we are also deeply challenged by the compounded vulnerabilities of narrow economies, exposure to natural disasters, together with inaction on the climate crisis, and structural inequalities in the international system that make recovery more costly. Mr. President, CARICOM has a clear vision for securing the foundations of a stable, economically productive international community. Through Article 33 of the Charter, every CARICOM state addressed the International Court of Justice under the application of a member of the United Nations on the profound consequences of climate change. This was a profound demonstration of CARICOM's commitment to the Charter in our use of the tools of the United Nations system. In this new era, CARICOM reconfirms itself to strengthening the tools of multilateralism, such as the International Court of Justice and the wider legal network, security and development, resources for an independent world. Mr. President, CARICOM will amplify its role regarding climate resilience, sustainable ocean governance, and equitable, transformed international financial architecture, and the economics, governance.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Kitts and Nevis. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of His Excellency Regis Michel Onaga, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Gabon.
President of the General Assembly, Secretary General, it is with great honor that I take the floor today on behalf of Gabon at this celebration of the 80th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter, this sacred text that since the 26th of June 2045 has enshrined the wishes for a peaceful world. Just 1 year after our independence, my country expressed its full, without reservation, commitment to the United Nations and with full loyalty. For my country and its president, the Charter isn't a simple treaty. It is the foundation of our common humanity, transcending languages, cultures, religions, to bring us together around universal values such as peace, human rights, and international cooperation. President, 8 decades after its establishment, the United Nations has broadly strived for our humanity, although we continue to see challenges, climate urgencies, setbacks in center democracy, and others. This is it's clear that the Charter remains our compass, but in the face of these challenges, we believe that it is time to make the UN more representative and equitable by including Africa and other regions even more. The Pact for the Future must be our roadmap for a UN fit for our time. We see increasing geopolitical instability, economic changes, and profound security challenges. Therefore, we have to reinvent the United Nations in this complex dynamic. International organizations are being forced to adapt. Our world is changing, and our organization has to change with it. Gabon has recently turned over an important page in its political history, and through our international and national commitments, we've benefited from our membership of the United Nations. We reaffirm our support for all initiatives creating new and constructive dynamics. Today, the world is more than interconnected. We have no other choice but to strengthen our solidarity, particularly with regards to climate justice, which calls on Gabon to take particular action. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Gabon. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Jamaica.
Mr. President, 80 years ago, the Charter set forth a vision of a world in which all countries, from the mightiest among us to the most vulnerable, were inspired to be governed by rules, not force, by dialogue, not domination. The Charter enshrined principles and purposes that remain as vital today as they were in 1945. As a small island developing state, Jamaica sees in the Charter both our protection and our potential. It is through the UN that we have engaged meaningfully in global discourse, helped to advance the 2030 Agenda, and contributed to impactful actions to support peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. The UN is a unique and invaluable institution as a convener on the matters of the greatest global significance. From climate change to global inequality, from conflict to disinformation, the UN remains the most inclusive and legitimate forum to forge common and effective solutions. We must continue to uphold this centerpiece of the multilateral framework, especially at a time when the world faces multiple crises that cannot be solved without collaboration. As we commemorate this day in history, Jamaica reaffirms its steadfast commitment to the Charter and to the values it represents. We echo the call to make the UN more effective, more accountable, and better equipped to meet the needs of all people, especially those who are most vulnerable. Even as we recommit to safeguarding and strengthening this institution, we must ensure that multilateralism delivers for all. Let this anniversary not only celebrate the journey so far, but strengthen our collective determination to shape a future anchored in trust, solidarity, and global cooperation for present and especially for future generations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Jamaica. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. 80 years ago today, delegates from 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to sign the UN Charter. President Truman declared at the closing ceremony as follows: "In this most destructive of all wars, you have won a victory against war itself." It was the hope of such a charter that helped sustain the courage of stricken peoples through the darkest days of the war. For it is a declaration of great faith by the nations of the earth, faith that war is not inevitable, faith that peace can be maintained. This statement reflects the moral clarity and shared purpose that defined the founding of the United Nations. Over the past 80 years, the United States has actively worked in the United Nations to promote the cause of peace and depart from the eras of devastating conflict. In reflecting on these 80 years, there are many things of which we can be proud. We have saved millions from starvation and extreme poverty, alleviated conflicts, and championed the call to freedom, ultimately fostering prosperity and improving living standards. However, we shouldn't overlook the shortcomings that limit the UN's potential, and we regret that the UN has lost sight of its founding mission. In this regard, wars still rage on multiple continents. Colleagues, the principles of the UN Charter must remain at the heart of this institution, not just as an agreement for a better world, but also as a continuing call to action. The UN must prioritize, in particular, its original purpose of maintaining international peace and security. We will look forward to a UN that serves member states, respects state sovereignty, and keeps faith that peace is possible and can indeed be.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador.
Al igual que en el verano.
Just as in the summer when the San Francisco conference took place, 80 years on, Ecuador remains committed to the principles and purposes enshrined in the UN Charter: respect for international law, the peaceful solution of disputes, sustainable development, human rights, and multilateral cooperation. The Charter represents much more than a founding text. It is a collective and indelible promise for an unfinished task, which is to build an order based on international law, solidarity, and mutual respect. Multilateralism is not optional. It's a necessity that keeps alive a hope for this world, a more interconnected, more fragmented world where we see deepening inequalities, less trust in institutions, including the UN, and a multiplication of conflicts. We have to find a direction that the Charter has provided for the last 8 decades. Something that will never change is the fact that no state can face the most urgent global challenges alone. Among these challenges, the threat posed by transnational organized crime, which is a scourge that undermines governance, fuels corruption, perpetuates violence, erodes peace, development prospects, and human rights. Effectively combating it requires collective action and global commitment. Mr. President, commemorating this anniversary is not about looking into the past, it is about projecting into the future, recognizing that the UN must renew itself. And it is high time to renew the spirit of San Francisco with vision, responsibility, and political will, with realism and courage that allows us to leave the heirs of the present a living hope for a better world. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Mr. President, 8 years ago, in the aftermath of unimaginable suffering, the adoption of the UN Charter marked the start of a remarkable collective endeavor that helped end colonialism, advanced international law, and saved millions from disease and famine. Brazil is proud to have stood among the 51 founding nations, one of only 6 to include women in their delegations. Among them was Dr. Berta Lutz, pioneering feminist and scientist who was key in enshrining gender equality in the Charter. At a time when multilateralism is facing unparalleled challenges, when states, through their actions or through the endorsement of the actions of others, violate the very premises at the basis of this organization, it is all the more proper and timely for us to uphold the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, not only by observing them, but also by reforming and empowering the organization tasked with their pursuit. An updated UN must be more representative, more legitimate, and thus more effective in delivering on its three pillars: peace and security with a reformed Security Council and enhanced peace building and conflict prevention action; sustainable development to help states prosper fairly and sustainably; and human rights in all their dimensions to the benefit of all. And this should come in the context of an empowered and revitalized General Assembly. This anniversary is a time for pride in what the UN has brought about, but also for recommitting to its very purpose: make the world a better place for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, President. The signing of the Charter marks one of the highlights in the history of treaty making, a landmark of international law. It is also a powerful and much needed reminder of our collective ability gathered in this room to overcome differences and to unify for the sake of the common good and for the purpose of the peaceful settlement of disputes. As we're undertaking the important and difficult task to make our organization fit for purpose, we can do so with the confidence that we have the strongest possible basis and guidance for our work, the Charter, whose purposes and principles are as relevant today as they ever have been. In pausing to commemorate the moment in time when the founding fathers and mothers signed this unique document 80 years ago, we should recall several of its key features. Its very first words are "We the Peoples." This is indeed an organization where we gather as representative of states, but we do so on behalf of and in the interest of the people we all serve. The preamble goes on to state our determination to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, framing the UN as the most visionary and ambitious peace project in the history of humankind, based on the principles of equal rights, self-determination, sovereign equality of all its members. It imposes an obligation on all of us to refrain in our international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. This, our peace project, is based on a premise that there can be no peace without development, no development without peace, and that there can be neither without the respect for human rights. The Charter continues to offer the legal framework for the collective action required to achieve its purposes. To make this a reality, it is our joint obligation to stand up for its provisions and to ensure their full implementation, as we have recommitted to do in the Pact for the Future. Our commitment in this regard is driven by the belief that we need, more than ever, an international order based on multilateralism, solidarity, and international law. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
President, 80 years ago, following the great victory of the World Anti-Fascism War, the San Francisco Conference unanimously adopted the Charter of the United Nations, laying the cornerstone of multilateralism, establishing the basic norms governing international relations, and chartering a clear course forward for humanity. 80 years later today, we are assembled here once again to reaffirm the spirit of the Charter and draw inspirations from history as we strive for a future where the ambitious vision of the Charter is translated into reality. We need to jointly safeguard the victorious outcomes of the Second World War and reject any erroneous rhetoric or acts aimed at distorting history. We should firmly uphold the international system with the UN at its core, the international order underpinned by international law, and the rules-based multilateral trading system. We should all abide by the purposes and principles of the Charter and respect the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all states. We need to champion a vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, commit to the peaceful settlement of disputes, and oppose wanton use or threat of force. We need to make common cause in practicing true multilateralism, rally behind the central role of UN in international affairs, press ahead with the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and work in concert to address global challenges. China was the first country to put its signature on the Charter. We will continue taking concrete actions to fulfill our solemn commitment to the Charter and work tirelessly for world peace and development in a community with a shared future for mankind. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, 80 years ago today, 50 nations gathered in San Francisco to sign the UN Charter. In doing so, they proved that rights could triumph over force, that hope could triumph over despair. The United Kingdom is proud to have helped shape that vision. 80 years on, we, the peoples, are an international community of 193 member states, of 8.2 billion people. Around the world, from megacities to rural plains, from rainforests to deserts, from islands to landlocked nations, together, the Charter remains one of our greatest accomplishments. Let it unite us now, as it did then, in the pursuit of peace, security, development, and human rights, in pursuit of the Charter's enduring principles of sovereign equality, peaceful dispute resolution, and the dignity and rights of all people. We look to the UN as the touchstone of those rights and hopes. But today, we see war and conflict stalling the progress that perhaps once felt inevitable. But progress is not inevitable. It takes resolve. It takes hard work. It takes negotiation and compromise. So on this 80th anniversary, let us turn towards the Charter and remind ourselves of the hard-won gains and the hard-learned lessons of the past. The UK will work with the Secretary-General and Member States to deliver meaningful reform at UN 80 for a more efficient and effective UN that delivers what the Charter promises and allows every one of us to realise our enshrined rights and hope for a better future. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Norway.
President, the UN Charter represents a turning point in history. When it was signed by 50 nations, including Norway, on this day, it marked the beginning of a transition away from a world ravaged by war, by excessive nationalism, and by colonial exploitation. The UN Charter established a universal body and a multilateral system that treats all members equally, men and women and the member states, through cooperation, dialogue, and the rule of law. President, for Norway, the Charter is the strongest collective security guarantee we have. Respect for and compliance with the Charter is for us a necessity, it's not an option. President, it is important to emphasize that even in an increasingly turbulent world, the vast majority of UN member states continuing to uphold the UN Charter and abide by international law. It is vital, therefore, that we, the majority, speak out when the Charter and its principles are trampled on. Double standards undermine universality, the heart and the essence of the Charter. President, built on the Charter, today's UN system continues to perform a critical role by advancing lasting peace, development, and human rights, and by implementing the Pact for the Future and Agenda 2030. So let's act with determination and reaffirm the vision, the ideals, and principles enshrined in the Charter by making the UN equipped to deliver and with impact for the most vulnerable, towards building a better future together. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Norway. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. The 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter is an important momentum to reunite efforts to maintain international peace and security, promote social and economic development of all nations. Today, we are facing the biggest number of conflicts since 1945. Therefore, the need to the UN has never been more urgent than it is today. In this context, the state of Qatar has always defended the universality of international law and peaceful settlement of conflicts and respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. It is a key pillar in the foreign policy of Qatar. In this connection, the state of Qatar reiterates its strong commitment to the spirit and letter of the Charter and the UN as the forum for dialogue and cooperation in our modern world. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania.
Today's celebration is not about the past, it is also about the future. The collective will of nations present in San Francisco established a rules-based system with the primary goal of preventing the horrors of another possible world war. Today's and tomorrow's multilateral system builds on the authority of the UN Charter and its core values. The fundamental principles laid down in the Charter are a vital compass for international relations. When they are grossly violated, it falls on the member states to call for their respect, as we have done so many times in this very hall. The results of negotiations 80 years ago were not delivered on a silver plate by delegates. They were based on an in-depth deliberations where fundamental principles were placed above everything else. While far from perfect, the UN system has proven the most effective source of relative stability and safeguard against generalized human suffering and destruction. Mr. President, we should refrain from outright abandonment of settled norms of international law for the sake of short-lived gains. The UN Charter does not belong to the past. It is a perennial beacon that has helped avert nuclear catastrophe, catalyze global cooperation, and inspire countless international treaties and mechanisms for human rights and humanitarian protection. The Charter carries immeasurable value for each nation individually and for all of us collectively. We all have a voice, a vote, and a role to play. Ever since joining the United Nations, Romania worked out to put into actions its commitment to the values, principles, and collective vision that the UN represents, with a rules-based multilateral order at its core. Drawing on our national experience, it is in our common interest to reaffirm effective action and to remind our own citizens the fundamental role played by the rules-based multilateral order in advancing their hopes for peace, dignity, and opportunity. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Romania. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, the Philippines is proud to be amongst the founding signatories of the Charter of the United Nations. It was at the San Francisco Conference in 1945. Our enduring engagement with the UN is linked to our independence in our journey as Asia's first republic. The exhibit on reviving the spirit of San Francisco could not have come at a better juncture. An exhibit panel shows Filipino General Carlos P. Romulo, a veteran of the war, signing the charter. He said of this moment later, and I quote, "The Filipino stake in the United Nations is the stake of an identical destiny of shared hope and endeavor," end of quote. And his life is a testament presiding over the UN organs, championing decolonization, advocating for the creation of the Special Committee of the Charter, and working with all nations on the 1982 Manila Declaration on the Peaceful Settlement of Disputes. In the past 8 decades, the Philippines has given its utmost to efforts to ensure that the Charter continues to serve as a beacon of hope and pillar of multilateralism, reinforcing the UN's capacities as it evolves alongside global transformation shaped by climate change, technology, geopolitical rivalries and strategic competition, and deepening inequalities. We remain committed to the Charter in our wide-ranging engagements as a reliable partner, innovative pathfinder, and committed peacemaker, standing for a United Nations that can act decisively in the face of global threats and opportunities towards a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world while upholding international law and human rights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
It is an honor to address you on behalf of Mexico, to reflect on what perhaps is the most significant document in recent history, the Charter of the United Nations, adopted a day like today in 1945. Following the devastation and the unprecedented suffering generated by the Second World War, the Charter at the time and now signified the collective commitment to build and sustain peace and guarantee that future generations would have an environment based on human rights, development, and shared norms. The Charter led to the foundation of the organization that we now know, which for 80 years has found its raison d'être in the yearning of humanity for a fairer and more peaceful world. While there have been many setbacks on the path, this yearning continues to guide the work of the organization and the very reason for multilateralism. The principles and purposes enshrined in the Charter, the sovereign equality of states, the peaceful solution of disputes, and respect for human rights, remain essential pillars of the international order that we long for. In a world with new and unprecedented challenges, the importance of the Charter has not diminished. On the contrary, the Charter reminds us that multilateral cooperation, diplomacy, and the respect for international law are more needed than ever. For Mexico, a country that actively participated in the discussions, drafting, and preparations for the signing of the Charter and hosted the Chapultepec conference, participating at this commemorative session is a moment of great significance. In this spirit, today we renew our confidence in the values of the Charter. The microphone has been cut off.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
President, today we come together in a spirit of unity and reflection on the 80th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter. In the pivotal year of 1945, representatives from 51 nations converged, driven by a shared vision of peace and cooperation. Amidst the backdrop of a world ravaged by conflict, these leaders forged an enduring institution devoted to safeguarding future generations from the devastating impacts of war. Moved by the lessons of history, they sought to uphold and promote human rights and fundamental freedoms that would guide us towards a brighter, more harmonious future. Today, the United Nations stands more than just an institution. Bringing together 193 countries, it is truly the backbone of our multilateral system, a cornerstone of effective global governance, standing tall as our collective mechanism for protecting human rights and ensuring a rules-based international order. In a world increasingly defined by complex challenges, rising inequality, poverty, hunger, armed conflicts, terrorism, insecurity, and the significant threat of human-induced climate change are all examples of such challenges. We live in a time of growing global insecurity and polarization, requiring strong checks and balances along with clear principles. Now more than ever, we need a united international response to address our collective challenges. President, at this critical juncture, the UN Charter is a world needs a United Nations that can respond with boldness, inclusivity, and steadfast resolve. In conclusion, I would like to take this opportunity to express Malta's gratitude and recognition of the invaluable contributions of our founders. Embracing the spirit of San Francisco, I reaffirm with pride Malta's steadfast commitment to the ideals and principles enshrined in the UN Charter, as well as the noble values advocated by this esteemed institution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands.
Mr. President, Excellencies, 80 years ago today, the United Nations Charter was signed in San Francisco. Rising out of the trauma of global conflict in World War II, the collective intention of the founding nations was to never return, and in so doing uphold security, human rights, and development. As part of a former strategic UN trusteeship, the Marshall Islands has a unique legacy and a closely shared history with the United Nations itself. It offers a vital and direct platform for our voices, but also did not fail to make grave errors in judgment or neglect for us and for many others. 8 decades later, the United Nations must face rising geopolitical threats and profound global and regional challenges. For small states, we deserve a better means of engagement with a dizzying traffic jam of issues and fora. It only rests upon us all as member states to demonstrate the necessary political will to better address today's complex world through a more focused UN system that is fit for purpose and does not continue to overstep the most vulnerable, including small island developing states. This is absolutely no longer a time to be going through the motions or repeating well-worn agendas. Deadlocked stall actions and change at scale can still not keep pace. To meet these contemporary challenges, member states must be as driven, pragmatic, and flexible as were 8 decades ago in pursuing a UN system reform. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Marshall Islands. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today we are reflecting on a document that has shaped the trajectory of nations and uplifted the voices of those long silenced, the Charter of the United Nations. For South Africa, this is not just an international agreement. It is a symbol of possibility, dignity, and rebirth. When the UN Charter was adopted in 1945, its principles of equality, human rights, and self-determination were a beacon of hope in a world still recovering from the ravages of war. But for South Africa, then under apartheid, that hope was deferred until the global community, anchored by this very charter, stood up against injustice. It was through the UN's consistent condemnation of apartheid and its embrace of universal human rights that South Africa found solidarity and strength. The Charter empowered the voices of those fighting for freedom and human dignity. When the democracy finally triumphed in 1994, it was more than a political transition. It was a realization of the Charter's promise. Today, South Africa is not only a proud member of the UN, it is a champion of the values enshrined in its Charter. From peacekeeping missions to global cooperation, South Africa continues to uphold the very principles that once supported its own journey to liberation. Let us never forget the UN Charter is not merely a historical text. It is a living pledge to justice, equality, and peace. And for South Africa, it will always be a reminder that the world does not stand by idly when people unite for what is right. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany.
Mr. President, Excellencies, Germany fully aligns itself with the statement held by the European Union, and I wish to add some remarks on my national capacity. The devastating war unleashed by Germany and the Nazi regime and the unfathomable crimes against humanity culminating in the Holocaust formed the terrible backlog against which the authors of the UN Charter began their work 80 years ago. Their aspiration was to lay the foundations for a better, for a more peaceful and a more just international order. Today we can clearly say June 26, 1945 marks a day of historic achievement and impact, and particularly for my country. The Charter of the United Nations, together with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, are the bedrock of our global values, values that my country reflects in its own constitution. The Charter created the framework of multilateralism that allowed Germany to return to the international community and to overcome its divisions. To uphold the Charter in its very essence means to protect life and human dignity. It means to leave no one behind, as we pledged in the 2030 Agenda. However, with wars and conflicts, inequalities and injustice, poverty and environmental degradation persisting, we must double our resolve to fulfill the Charter's promise. As we mark this day, let me reaffirm Germany's unwavering commitment not only in words but also in deeds. As a leading financial contributor to the United Nations system, as a champion for peacekeeping and peace building, a reliable partner for sustainable development and climate action, a firm defender of human rights and international law, and a tireless bridge builder. Excellency, Germany stands ready to help to shape a renewed and effective United Nations, one that remains faithful to the timeless values and principle of its charter. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru.
Gracias.
Thank you. 80 years after the signing of the UN Charter, we are navigating a period marked by a multidimensional global crisis that significantly affects multilateralism. In this context, Peru notes with concern that we are facing the highest number of violent conflicts since World War II, and the international legal framework to protect civilian populations is increasingly weakened. As a founding member of the UN, Peru reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism as the most legitimate and effective means to address global challenges, from conflict prevention and peace building to sustainable development, the defense of human rights, and environmental protection. We proudly remember Rosina Vega Castro, a Peruvian delegate and one of only 8 women present at the signing of the Charter, symbolizing the value of inclusive participation since the organization's inception. We also pay tribute to Ambassador Javier Pérez de Cuellar, the 5th Secretary General of the UN, and to date the only Latin American to have held this position. His tenure was distinguished by a firm commitment to dialogue, moderation, and the peaceful resolution of some of the most complex geopolitical challenges of his time. In light of the ongoing process to select the next Secretary General, we believe it is time to once again recognize the voice and leadership of Latin America and the Caribbean in shaping the future of the organization. By reaffirming our full adherence to the purposes and principles of the Charter, Peru reiterates its strong commitment to international law, the peaceful resolution of disputes, and the strengthening of the multilateral system as essential paths towards a more just, stable, and cooperative global order. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden.
Mr. President, 80 years ago in San Francisco, delegates from across the world came together to agree on the UN Charter. It was a bold act of faith in multilateralism, in the rule of law, and in the shared responsibility to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Yet, we must acknowledge that this promise has not been fulfilled for all. For too many, peace remains fragile, justice elusive, and dignity denied. Let's be clear, the architects of San Francisco were not idealists chasing a utopia. They were realists shaped by the devastation of war, determined to build institutions strong enough to withstand the pressures of power and division. I feel this history personally. My grandfather was present at the San Francisco conference. When the proceedings began, the war in Europe was in its final days, and war was still ravaging in the Pacific. The outcome of the conference was uncertain. In his notes, my grandfather described how the atmosphere at the conference was not brimming with starry-eyed optimism, but was businesslike and pragmatic. My grandfather recalled one striking moment in San Francisco, encountering a group of silent American soldiers standing in uniform, their faces marked by age far beyond their years. They were blind veterans, men who had seen too much and now saw nothing. Their presence was a sobering reminder of what was at stake. Excellencies, colleagues, the stakes remain. Peace is not a passive state of affairs, as my fellow countryman, Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld put it. Rather, peace is something we must build every day with conviction and courage. Sweden will play its part. We will remain a steadfast friend of the United Nations and a firm defender of the Charter. We will continue to uphold human rights, gender equality, and international law. And we will stand fully behind the Secretary General's efforts to reform and revitalize our organization. The United Nations is not a completed project, but a living endeavor that requires faith in international cooperation. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sweden. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Mr. President, We are commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Charter in the midst of a complex international scenario characterized by economic crises, the climate change, geopolitical tensions, and conflicts threatening international peace and security, as well as unconventional warfare, blockades, regime change attempts, and frequent violations of the principles on which this organization was founded. So many resources are used in the arms race, while more than 2/3 of the SDGs remain unfulfilled. We are seeing increasing hunger, and poverty is not falling away. This means that we need to change the current economic order, eradicate the root causes of conflicts, and change the patterns of production and consumption that are currently irrational and unsustainable. Developed countries must meet their commitment to ODA and their climate responsibilities. The application of unilateral coercive measures must end immediately. Humanity needs peace and strict respect for the sovereignty of states, non-interference in their internal affairs, and the right of peoples to self-determination. As reaffirmed by the historic leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro Ruiz, at the UN General Assembly in 1960, he said, "We are seeing the disappearance of the philosophy of despoilment, and we are seeing the disappearance of colonies, of monopolies, and thus humanity will have reached a true stage of development." End of quote. Let us promote solidarity and international cooperation. Let us face common challenges with a sense of urgency. To do that, the United Nations and this General Assembly, even with its limitations, are the most powerful tool that we have. Cuba reiterates its invariable position in favor of multilateralism, the greatest expression of which is the charter of this organization. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Mr. President, every morning as I walk into my office, I pass a photo on the wall. It shows the Lebanese delegates signing the UN Charter in San Francisco in 1945. A proud reminder that Lebanon was among the 51 founding members at a time when global warfare had been the norm. This early engagement reflected my country's commitment to the core principles of the United Nations, commitment that endures despite the hardship. Since then, the Charter has been a source of political solace in moments of uncertainty. When our sovereignty was violated or our people faced aggression, we turned to it as a compass. The promise of sovereign equality, one country, one vote, remains essential to our belief in an order built on rules and justice. Every voice, regardless of size or power, is to be heard. Today, we see worrying signs that the principles of the Charter are under strain, at times applied inconsistently, overlooked, or sidelined. Many no longer believe in the Charter or in multilateralism, but we in Lebanon do believe in this Charter and this organization. We believe not because the system is perfect, but because without it, the alternative is far worse, a world governed by force, not by law. And so, we call on all member states not to retreat from the Charter in moments of difficulty, but to return to it. It's our best guarantee against the normalization of chaos and wars. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lebanon. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, 80 years ago, the Charter of the United Nations was signed in San Francisco with a bold promise to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to uphold human rights, and to promote social progress in larger freedom. for Sierra Leone and many formerly colonized nations. This charter became the foundation for our sovereign statehood, our integration into the community of nations, and our pursuit of peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. Over the past 8 decades, the charter has proven its enduring relevance across the 3 founding pillars of the United Nations. Sierra Leone's journey from civil conflict 24 years ago to peace and democratic consolidation is a testament to this. As His Excellency President Julius Maada Bio said in his video message, with UN partnership, Sierra Leone emerged from conflict to become a contributor to global peace, peacekeeping, an advocate for development cooperation, and a firm defender of international human rights and dignity. Yet, Mr. President, the Charter's promise is under strain. We'll face a wall of worsening conflict, global inequalities, and a growing disregard for international law. Today's challenges are compounded by actions that erode the legitimacy of our collective multilateral institutions, especially when might is used in place of right. Powerful states must lead with responsibility, not selectivity. The rules-based international order must apply equally to all. As we mark this milestone, Sierra Leone calls for a recommitment to the principles of the UN Charter, the same principles that guided the post-colonial transformation of colonized peoples and continue to anchor our multilateral system. Central to this is a long overdue reform of the Security Council to ensure Africa's full representation in both permanent and non-permanent categories. The historical injustice must be redressed. To honor the spirit of San Francisco, we need not just words, but action. Action that reflects equity, justice, inclusion, and responsibility. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. President, 80 years ago today, the founders of the UN gathered in San Francisco to sign the Charter, determined to save the succeeding generations from the scourge of war, reaffirm human rights, respect international law, and promote social progress. Since then, the UN has stood with humanity, touching every aspect of our lives across the globe. Despite its immense achievements, the UN now faces mounting and unprecedented challenges, from escalating armed conflict to the need for structural reform. It is time to renew our commitment to international cooperation by reinvigorating multilateralism and support the UN80 initiative to help the UN better fulfill its core mandates. Mr. President, the history of the Republic of Korea stands as a living testament to the UN's founding purposes. We won independence the very year the Charter was signed, and fought alongside the first ever UN forces to defend our nation. From the ashes of the war, we laid the groundwork for prosperity with the help of the international community. Since joining the UN in 1991, we have been a proud and active contributor, and now we are seeking an even greater role. On this meaningful day, celebrating the spirit of San Francisco, I reaffirm the Republic of Korea's commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. We, the peoples of the United Nations, came together 80 years ago to forge a new path for humanity. Born in the aftermath of war, the Charter was not just a treaty, but a moral covenant to save future generations from the scourge of war, uphold human dignity, and foster progress in larger freedoms. Though Africa's presence at the negotiating table was limited to just a few countries, Her gallant sons, including those from Zimbabwe, had fought in distant lands under colonial flags. They fought with courage in a war not of their choosing, and many paid the ultimate price. Their sacrifice and that of many others compels us to uphold a world free of domination and grounded in justice. The Charter proclaimed that all nations are sovereign and equal, that peace must be pursued through dialogue, not domination, and that international relations must be governed by law, not force. Yet today, we witness rising tensions and selective adherence to the Charter's ideals. Events in the Middle East and elsewhere underscore the erosion of the principles enshrined in the Charter. Likewise, the continued use of unilateral coercive measures highlights the urgent need for recommitment to the Charter's ideals. Zimbabwe reaffirms its steadfast commitment to the Charter. We call for a revitalized multilateral system that is more democratic, more representative, more responsive to the voices of the Global South. This anniversary should be a recommitment to walk boldly in the light of the Charter towards a future of peace, dignity, and a shared prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Mr. President, peace, that was in the minds of the delegates who traveled from New York to San Francisco in April '45. It took the peace train 4 days to arrive. Along the journey, people were cheering, music was playing, church bells were ringing. This is how a delegate of Yugoslavia, a Slovenian Stane Kraševec, remembered those days. It was a celebration of a new era, a celebration of peace. San Francisco delegates matched people's enthusiasm and expectations by agreeing and signing the UN Charter. In the years that followed, we have achieved significant progress. We have also come to understand that peace is not given, that UN power of rules does not have immunity against the power of might. While we have avoided another global war, we are faced with the highest number of conflicts, the highest number of civilians killed, and the highest number of refugees. People continue to turn to the UN for solutions, for salvation, but it seems we are not able to match their expectations. Today, when we celebrate the UN Charter, which remains as valid as ever, we should admit that the state of the world is in dire need of leadership for peace. This is time to renew our commitment to multilateralism and build a new cross-regional coalition of the willing to protect the system of collective security built around the UN, its charter, and international law. We are on our peace train now, because to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, as stated in the UN Charter, is now our responsibility. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kazakhstan.
In the aftermath of a devastating global war, the international community gathered in San Francisco in 1945 to chart a new course. The founding members of the United Nations chose cooperation over confrontation, diplomacy over violence, and the rule of law over the use of force. The Charter of the United Nations marked the beginning of a new era in international relations, anchored in sovereign equality, territorial integrity, human dignity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Upon gaining independence and joining the United Nations, Kazakhstan made its own sovereign choice for peace. We renounced nuclear weapons and closed the Semipalatinsk test site, transforming a painful legacy into a lasting contribution to global security. Today, we remain convinced that strength lies in cooperation, inclusive institutions, and ethical leadership capable of addressing global disruption, climate insecurity, and technological threats. Kazakhstan's sustained engagement across the United Nations system and other international and regional platforms reflects our deep commitment to multilateralism. Under the leadership of President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, my country continues to uphold the values of the Charter and advance respect for international humanitarian law. In partnership with key international actors, we have launched a global initiative to galvanize political commitment and strengthen compliance with the Geneva Conventions. We welcome the Secretary General's UN80 initiative and support the Pact for the Future. Our efforts to establish the UN SDGs Regional Center in Almaty and to advance the creation of International Agency for Biological Security reflect our vision of a more responsive, resilient, and future-oriented United Nations. This anniversary is a reminder of our collective moral obligation and enduring hope. Kazakhstan reaffirms its pledge to ensure that this Charter continues to serve as both a covenant of conscience and compass for our shared future. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kazakhstan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as a founding member of the organization, Uruguay joins this commemorative session to pay tribute to the signing of the United Nations Charter, which we signed along with another 50 states exactly 80 years ago in San Francisco. We did so with the belief that the Charter remains today more than ever an ethical and political compass in a world marked by multidimensional crises, growing inequalities, and shared challenges. As recently expressed by the President of the Republic, Yamando Ursi, this commemoration should be a moment of remembrance, but above all of renewal. Renewal of the commitment to the founding values that gave rise to the organization, and also of the political will to make it more effective, closer, and more legitimate. The Charter is more than a founding text. It is a universal promise of cooperation, peace, and justice that we must continue to honor with concrete actions. Uruguay is a democratic country deeply committed to multilateralism, with a well-known history of supporting the work of the UN. We have been traditional defenders of respect for international law, the peaceful resolution of disputes, and the protection and promotion of human rights. We participate with dedication and commitment in peacekeeping operations, and since 1952 we have sent military observers to verification missions. We promoted disarmament as a pillar of collective security, and we have advocated for international cooperation based on equity and solidarity. We reaffirm our willingness to be an active part of a multilateral renewal that is people-centered, a renewal that makes the organization more capable of preventing conflicts, providing effective responses to the numerous humanitarian crises we are facing today, supporting international cooperation, offering lasting solutions to the structural challenges that are faced by developing countries, and combating climate change. Uruguay believes in a more agile and transparent UN, as well as a more robust and effective one that is able to respond to the challenges of this present century, but also a UN that is more sensitive and connected to the reality of the communities that need it most. We support the reform processes that are strengthening the organization without compromising the principles of universality, geographic representation, multilingualism, and others.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uruguay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal. Thank
you. Mr. President, Portugal welcomes this opportunity to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations. The principles of the Charter remain as vital today as they were in 1945. As we reflect on 8 decades of United Nations action, we should not ignore that we are facing today the highest number of conflicts since 1945, and also the highest number of vetoes at the Security Council since 1989. We must also confront the complex challenges of our time, such as the proliferation of armed conflict, rising inequalities, ending poverty, food insecurity, and climate change. These challenges should not make us lose confidence in the irrefutable benefits of this organization, but rather encourage us to engage in stronger multilateral cooperation and reinvigorate our commitment to the values of the Charter, as well as to preserve, promote, and protect international law. Portugal reaffirms its unwavering support to the United Nations as the cornerstone of a rules-based international order. We remain deeply committed to preventive diplomacy, peaceful resolution of conflicts, sustainable development, and the protection of human rights. We also reiterate our strong support for the Secretary-General's efforts to revitalize the United Nations system, including through the implementation of the Pact for the Future, and make it more inclusive, effective, and fit for purpose. Let this milestone serve not only as a moment of remembrance, but also as a call to action, to uphold the promise of the Charter and build a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world for future generations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Portugal. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. We shall continue the plenary segment this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this hall. The meeting is adjourned.